The wind howled across the empty field as Daniel pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders. The day had been long, the kind of day that bled into the night with no mercy, the kind of day that made him question why he was still holding on. His hands were cracked and stained from the tools of the workshop, and the quiet creak of the old farmhouse behind him only reminded him of how empty it had become since Sarah passed. 3 years, 3 winters alone, and each one colder than the last. He was about to shut the door when he saw her. A shadow moved through the storm, small at first, then taking shape as the wind pushed her forward. She wasn't walking so much as stumbling, one step at a time, her arms wrapped around herself. Her coat was far too thin for the weather, and in one hand she held a tattered envelope, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Daniel's instinct told him to close the door. He didn't owe anyone anything, not anymore. But something about the way she lifted her face, pale, soaked and shaking, stopped him cold. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither spoke. The rain pounded between them, drowning out the world. Then she whispered, barely audible over the storm, "Are you Mr. Daniel Reed?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes," he said finally. She exhaled a shuddering breath and took a step closer. "I'm Alina." She held up the letter, the one she'd been clutching like a lifeline. "From the agency." Daniel blinked, confusion mixing with disbelief. He had written to the agency months ago, out of desperation more than hope. A mail-order bride, they called it, a practical arrangement, they said, for widowers in need of companionship and women seeking new beginnings. He had never expected anyone to actually come. He'd half assumed it was a scam, another cruel joke the world was playing on him. But here she was. "Come in," he said, his voice gruff, almost reluctant. She nodded quickly and stepped inside, dripping rain onto the wooden floorboards. The fire in the hearth had burned low, but the flickering light caught the sheen of her wet hair and the trembling of her fingers as she unbuttoned her coat. Beneath it she wore a simple dress, worn at the edges, stretched at the seams. She wasn't what most would call beautiful in the way of magazines or television. Her body was full, her face soft, her cheeks flushed from the cold. But there was something arresting in the way she held herself, fragile yet dignified, like someone used to standing alone. "I'm sorry," she said, glancing down at the puddle forming beneath her feet. "The train was delayed, and then the carriage driver wouldn't take me further when he found out where you lived. I walked the last mile." Daniel said nothing at first. He couldn't look away from her eyes, grey, almost silvery, the kind that seemed to hold too much history for someone so young. She couldn't have been more than 30, maybe younger, but there was a tiredness about her that went beyond years. "You shouldn't have come out in this weather," he said finally, setting another log on the fire. Her lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "I didn't have a choice." He studied her for a moment longer before gesturing toward the chair by the fire. "Sit, warm yourself. I'll make some tea." As he moved about the small kitchen, he found himself glancing back at her more than once. She sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, as though afraid to take up space. Her eyes followed the flames with quiet fascination, and when the kettle began to whistle, she flinched, a tiny, involuntary motion that made Daniel's chest tighten in ways he didn't understand. When he brought her the tea, she accepted it with both hands, murmuring a soft thank you. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "You said you're from the agency." They told me you'd written letters," she nodded. "I did. I never got them." A shadow passed across her face. They said you stopped replying." Daniel frowned. "I never received anything after the first one." For a brief moment, confusion hung heavy between them. Then Alina looked down into her cup, her voice small. "It doesn't matter. They told me you needed someone to help around the house. I can cook, clean, sew. I didn't order a servant." Daniel interrupted more sharply than he meant to. Her head jerked up, eyes wide with alarm. I didn't want this to feel like that." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her hands still gripped the cup like it might slip from her fingers. "Then why did you send for me?" The question hung in the air. Daniel opened his mouth to answer, but the truth stuck in his throat. Because the nights were too quiet. Because every creak of the floorboards reminded him that no one was there to listen. Because he couldn't bear the thought of dying alone in this house where love had once lived and died with Sarah. Instead, he said, "I thought maybe I could help someone. Give them a chance. And maybe," he stopped himself, "maybe find a reason to keep living." Alina didn't push him. She simply nodded, as if she understood more than he was saying. Then softly she added, "I wasn't their first choice, you know." Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. There were other women, younger, prettier, thinner. They sent them to other men first. When those didn't work out, "They sent me, the one nobody picked." She said it without bitterness, just quiet resignation. Daniel felt a strange ache in his chest. "That's not right." She gave a faint shrug. "It's life." They fell silent again. Outside, the storm raged on, shaking the windows and rattling the roof. The old farmhouse groaned against the wind. Daniel watched her sip her tea, her hands steadying, her eyes softening in the firelight. For the first time in years, the room didn't feel empty. As the minutes stretched into an hour, he asked her small things: where she was from, how she found the agency, whether she had any family. Her answers were short, measured, careful. She was from somewhere far east, a small town near the mountains. No family left. She had come here because she wanted a place where she could belong. But every time he asked about her past, about what she had left behind, her gaze would flicker toward the window, as if watching for something or someone out there in the dark. When she finally rose to her feet and asked where she could sleep, Daniel showed her the spare room across from his. As she passed him in the narrow hallway, he caught the faint scent of rain and lavender. Her steps were quiet, almost hesitant, as if she feared she might be turned away at any moment. "Good night, Mr. Reed," she whispered. "Good night, Alina," he replied. Though his voice was softer than he intended, he stood there, long after her door had closed, staring at the faint light beneath it. Something about her unsettled him, not in a way that frightened, but in a way that stirred something buried deep inside. The loneliness that had settled into his bones began to shift, replaced by a feeling he couldn't quite name. Outside, the storm began to ease, the thunder rolling away into the hills. But Daniel couldn't shake the image of her standing there on his porch, eyes full of secrets and sorrow. He didn't know what story she carried, or why she seemed so haunted. All he knew was that the moment he opened that door, his life, quiet, predictable, and half dead, had begun to change. And as he turned off the lamp and lay awake listening to the rain, he couldn't help but wonder what Alina was hiding, and why deep down he already cared. The days that followed passed like slow ripples across still water. Daniel tried to settle back into his old rhythm, feeding the livestock, repairing the fences, tending the small garden Sarah had once loved. But now, there was another pair of footsteps echoing through the house. Alina moved quietly, almost ghost-like, as if afraid to disturb the silence that had long made the farmhouse its home. Each morning, Daniel would find breakfast already laid out before he woke. Fresh bread, eggs, and sometimes a bit of jam. She'd always be standing by the stove, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up. He noticed how she avoided meeting his eyes for too long, and how she seemed to anticipate his every movement, refilling his coffee before he asked, handing him his coat before he reached for it. It wasn't servitude, it was habit. The kind born from a life of trying to please others before they could reject you. When she smiled, it was small and fleeting, like a candle flame fighting against wind. But when she laughed, the few rare times he managed to make her laugh, the sound filled the room in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. The townsfolk, however, were not as kind. Word spread quickly in places like Maple Hollow. A widower with a mail-order bride? It was a story that practically told itself. When they went into town for supplies, whispers followed them like shadows. "That's her," one woman murmured at the bakery. "The one they sent him from overseas." "She's bigger than I expected," another said, not bothering to lower her voice. Daniel saw Alina stiffen beside him, her hand tightening around the loaf of bread she was holding. He wanted to say something, to defend her. But before he could, she turned, her expression calm, but her eyes dimmed with quiet hurt. "Let's go," she said softly. They walked home in silence. That night, Daniel couldn't shake the guilt. He found her sitting by the window, staring out at the moonlit fields. "You shouldn't let them get to you," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "They don't matter." "Yes, they do," he insisted. "They have no right to—" She cut him off gently. "You think this is new for me, Daniel? Being judged, mocked?" She turned then, her face pale in the silver light. "I've heard every name, every cruel word. It doesn't hurt because it's new. It hurts because it's old." Her honesty left him speechless. She went back to gazing out the window. "Where I come from," she said, her voice softer now, "women like me aren't chosen. We're tolerated until we're not. I learned long ago that it's better to stay quiet and keep working. Quiet people are easy to forget, and sometimes being forgotten is safer." Daniel sat across from her, struggling to find the right words. He wanted to tell her she didn't need to hide, that she was more than the cruel things people said, but the words felt heavy in his throat, too intimate, too soon. Instead, he said, "You're not invisible here." That made her look at him. For the first time, he saw something flicker behind her eyes, gratitude maybe, or disbelief. "You say that now," she murmured, "but you don't know me." "Then let me," he said quietly. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to respond, but she only nodded once before turning back to the window. "Maybe," she whispered. Over the next few weeks, life between them began to take shape, fragile, unspoken, but real. Daniel found himself looking forward to her presence, the way she hummed softly while cooking, the way she paused before speaking, as though measuring every word, the way she smiled when he told her stories about Sarah, without jealousy or pity, just understanding. But there were moments, brief, unsettling ones, when Daniel would catch her lost in thought, staring at nothing. Once he came in from the fields to find her clutching a small, crumpled photograph. When she noticed him, she panicked, quickly shoving it into her apron pocket. "Who's that?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No one." Her voice trembled just enough to betray the lie. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the faint creaks of the old farmhouse, wondering what kind of past she carried. The agency had told him little, just that she was single, without family, looking for a stable home. But there was something in her eyes, something deeper than loneliness. It was guilt, or grief, maybe both. One evening, a week later, he heard soft sobbing from her room. The sound pierced the stillness of the house. For a moment he hesitated. Should he knock or leave her to her privacy? His hand hovered over the door before he finally tapped gently. "Alina?" he called softly. The crying stopped instantly. He waited, but there was no answer. When he turned the handle, the door opened just enough for him to see her sitting on the edge of her bed, the same photograph clutched in her hands. Her shoulders were shaking. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to." She wiped at her eyes, forcing a small, brittle smile. "It's fine, just an old memory." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Who is it?" She hesitated, then hid the photograph behind her back. "No one important." "That doesn't sound true." Her breath hitched, and for a moment Daniel thought she might finally tell him. But then she looked up at him, her eyes wide and fearful, and shook her head. "Please, just leave it, Daniel." He wanted to push, but something in her expression stopped him. Pain, real, raw, and fresh, as if whatever haunted her hadn't happened long ago. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said softly. "But if you ever want to tell me, I'll listen." She nodded once, her lips trembling. "Thank you." He left the room quietly, the image of her tear-streaked face burning into his mind. The next morning, as he stepped outside to fetch water from the well, something caught his eye. A small square of paper fluttered across the yard, caught on the fence by the wind. He picked it up and froze. It was the photograph. The edges were worn, but the image was clear enough. Alina, younger, smiling, holding a baby boy in her arms. The joy in her face was unmistakable, radiant even. But behind that joy was a shadow, a tall man standing half out of frame, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. Daniel's chest tightened. When Alina came out moments later, she saw what he was holding. Her face went pale. "You dropped this," he said quietly. She snatched it from his hand, clutching it to her chest. "Where did you find it?" "In the yard." Her voice trembled. "You shouldn't have looked." "I didn't mean to. I said you shouldn't have looked," she snapped, the sharpness in her tone startling him. Immediately her expression crumpled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to shout. Please just forget you saw it." But Daniel couldn't. That night, as he watched her across the dinner table, her face calm, her eyes distant, he knew there was something more. A story she was desperate to keep buried. And though he didn't know it yet, that photograph was the key to everything. To her fear, her silence, and the dangerous past she had fled to escape. Outside, the wind rose again, whispering against the windows like a warning. Inside, the tension between them deepened. Fragile, unspoken, and charged with secrets neither was ready to face. But the truth was coming. And when it did, neither of their lives would ever be the same. The photograph burned in Daniel's hand long after Alina disappeared into her room. The image of her holding that baby, her face radiant, her eyes filled with a joy he had never seen on her before, haunted him through the night. He sat by the dying fire, the embers glowing faintly like the last heartbeat of something once alive. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a heavy silence, but Daniel's thoughts wouldn't rest. Who had taken that picture? Who was the man standing behind her? And most of all, what had happened to the child? The next morning, Alina moved through the house as if nothing had happened. She made breakfast, fed the chickens, hung the laundry on the line. Her hands were steady, her smile polite, but her eyes avoided his. Every time Daniel looked at her, he could feel the walls she had built around herself tightening. He wanted to tear them down, but how could he when he didn't even know what lay hidden inside? He tried to pretend things were normal, but the photograph had changed everything. The way she flinched when he came near, the way she stared out the window for hours, lost in thought. It all made sense now. She was running from something, or someone. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Daniel found her sitting on the porch. Her hair caught the light like a halo, but her expression was distant, her fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. He stepped outside, careful not to startle her. "I've found the photograph again," he said quietly. She froze. For a long moment she didn't move. Then slowly she turned to look at him. "You shouldn't have kept it." "I couldn't throw it away," he said. "It looked important." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. "Who's the baby, Alina?" he asked, his tone gentle. "Your son." Her breath caught. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment Daniel thought she might deny it. But then she nodded, once small and broken. "Yes," she whispered. "He's mine." Daniel's heart clenched. "Where is he now?" She looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. "Gone." The word hung in the air, heavy as lead. "What do you mean, gone?" Daniel pressed softly. "Dead?" Her eyes snapped up wide with panic. "No," she cried. Then her voice broke, collapsing into a whisper. "No, not dead. Taken." Daniel sank onto the step beside her. The air seemed to thicken between them. "Taken by who?" Alina swallowed hard, her fingers clutching the shawl tighter. "By the man who bought me." The words hit him like a blow. "Bought you?" She nodded slowly, eyes unfocused, like she was seeing something far away. "I didn't come here from an agency like they said." "Not really. It was a trade, a deal made through one of those so-called marriage bureaus. I thought I was coming to start a new life. Instead, I became property." Daniel's stomach twisted. "You mean he—" "Yes," she whispered before he could finish. "He wanted a wife who looked good beside him, someone to show off, not someone like me. When I got there, he told me I wasn't what he expected. Too big, too plain. He said I embarrassed him." Her voice cracked and tears welled in her eyes. "But I was pregnant already. He said he'd raise the child without me, that I wasn't fit to be a mother." Daniel stared at her, his throat tight. "And you just let him take your child?" She shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I fought. I screamed. I begged him to let me keep my son. But he had money, power. I had nothing. One night he sent me away, told me to sign papers I couldn't even read. Then he threw me out. I haven't seen my boy since." The raw pain in her voice made Daniel's chest ache. He wanted to reach out to comfort her, but his hands felt heavy, useless. "How long ago?" he asked softly. 2 years, she said. 2 years since I last held him. She drew in a shaky breath. I came here hoping to disappear. But every night I hear his cry. Every night I wonder if he remembers me. Daniel looked away, his jaw clenched. The idea that anyone could take something so precious from her, it made his blood boil. "What was his name?" "Peter," she whispered. "I named him after my father." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the cicadas in the distance. Finally, Daniel turned to her. "Then we'll find him." Her head jerked up. "What?" "We'll find your son," he said firmly. "That man has no right to keep him." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she shook her head. "You don't understand. He's dangerous, Daniel. He has connections. I barely escaped. If he finds out I'm alive—" "I don't care," Daniel said, his voice rising. "You're not alone anymore." Her lips parted, trembling with disbelief. No one had ever said those words to her before. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "Because you deserve to be free," he said simply. "And because no mother should live without her child." For a brief moment, something like hope flickered in her eyes. But then fear drowned it out again. "Even if we could find him, what would we do? I have nothing. No money, no papers, no proof he's mine. We'll figure it out," Daniel said. "Together." Before she could answer, a sound cut through the still evening air, the low growl of an approaching engine. Daniel turned, frowning. A pair of headlights glowed faintly at the end of the dirt road, growing brighter as a car rolled toward the house. Alina went pale. "No," she whispered, standing abruptly. Daniel rose too, heart pounding. "Who is it?" She backed away, shaking her head. "It's him." Daniel stared at her. "The man?" She nodded, her face white as chalk. "He found me." The car came to a stop just outside the gate. For a moment all was still. Then the driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His suit was dark, his movements calm, too calm. Even from the porch, Daniel could see the glint of arrogance in his posture, the cruel curve of his smile. "Alina," the man called, his voice smooth as oil. "You've been difficult to track down." Daniel stepped forward, his instincts flaring. "Who the hell are you?" The man's gaze flicked over him with disdain. "A friend," he said lazily. "And you must be the farmer playing husband." "How sweet." Daniel's fists clenched. "You'd better leave." The man chuckled softly. "I'm not here for you, old man. I'm here for her. And for what belongs to me," Alina gasped. "You can't." "Oh, but I can," he said, his tone turning cold. "You forget, my dear, you signed a contract. You and the boy are mine by law." Daniel took a step closer, his voice hard. "You can take your law and shove it. She's not yours anymore." The man's smile vanished. His eyes darkened. "You think you can hide her from me?" He reached into his coat and Alina screamed. Daniel moved instinctively, pulling her behind him. But before the man could take another step, a faint sound pierced the night, a baby's cry. The sound froze everyone in place. Daniel's eyes widened. The cry came from the car. Alina's breath hitched, her trembling hand covering her mouth. "Peter," she whispered. The man smirked, resting his hand on the car door. "You see? He never forgot you. I thought I'd bring him along for closure." Tears spilled down Alina's cheeks. Daniel stepped forward, rage and disbelief colliding inside him. "You brought her child here?" The man shrugged. "I thought it might make things easier." But before he could say another word, Alina broke free, running toward the car. The man reached for her, but Daniel was faster. He grabbed the stranger's arm, twisting it behind his back as Alina flung open the car door. The baby's cry grew louder. "Peter," she sobbed, gathering the child into her arms, clutching him as if she'd never let go again. The man struggled, shouting threats, but Daniel didn't hear them. All he could see was Alina holding her son, the storm of 2 years breaking at last. And in that moment Daniel knew this wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs. The night air was thick with tension, heavy enough to make it hard to breathe. The man stood on the porch, his shadow stretching long under the pale wash of the headlights. The baby's cries echoed through the darkness, piercing and raw, as Alina clutched her son to her chest like she might never get another chance. Daniel could feel his heart pounding so loud it seemed to shake his ribs. The man's eyes, cold and predatory, glinted in the faint light as he adjusted his coat, the fabric shifting enough for Daniel to catch the outline of something metallic beneath it. "Put him down," the man said quietly, his voice calm in the way only dangerous men could manage. "He's mine." Alina's arms tightened around the child. "He's my son," she cried, voice cracking with desperation. "You took him from me." "I gave him a better life," the man sneered, stepping forward. "One you could never have provided. Look at you, living on scraps, begging for affection from strangers. You think this is love? This is pity." "Enough," Daniel growled, stepping between them. His weathered hands curled into fists. "You need to leave, now." The man laughed, a cold, humorless sound that carried through the night. "You think you can protect her? You don't know what you're dealing with, old man." Daniel's voice was steady, though every muscle in his body screamed with adrenaline. "Try me!" A tense silence followed. The wind stirred, rustling the long grass in the field. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, then fell silent again. The man took another step, his shoes crunching on the gravel. "I own her," he said, eyes locked on Daniel. "By law, she's mine. By contract, she's mine. She signed it, every word. I even kept the papers." "You're harboring stolen property." Daniel could feel Alina trembling behind him. He wanted to look back to reassure her, but he didn't dare take his eyes off the man. "People aren't property," Daniel said. "You don't own her, and you damn sure don't own that child." The man's jaw twitched. "You're making a mistake." "No," Daniel said softly. "I'm fixing one." The man moved fast, his hand darting into his coat, metal glinting under the porch light. Alina screamed. Daniel lunged forward without thinking, grabbing the man's wrist. The gun fired, the shot exploding through the night like thunder. The recoil sent a flash of light across the yard, and for a split second Daniel thought he was dead. But the bullet missed, whizzing past his ear. The two men struggled, feet slipping on the wet porch. The gun clattered to the floorboards, spinning out of reach. The man swung wildly, landing a heavy blow to Daniel's jaw that sent him reeling backward. Pain shot through his face, but he stayed on his feet, fueled by something deeper than fear. Behind them, Alina screamed again, clutching her son. "Stop it!" she cried. "Please stop!" The man turned, his face twisted with fury, and reached for her. But before he could touch her, Daniel slammed into him from behind, sending both of them crashing through the railing. They hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from Daniel's lungs. Rain began to fall again, light and cold, turning the dirt beneath them into mud. The man scrambled for the gun, but Daniel caught his hand, driving his knee into the man's chest. The weapon slipped from his grip and landed just inches away. "Stay down!" Daniel shouted, pressing his weight into him. The man spat blood and grinned, even pinned to the ground. "You think this ends here?" he hissed. "You think you can just take her and walk away?" Daniel's voice was low and steady. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." A new sound cut through the chaos, the distant wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flickered faintly on the horizon, growing closer. The man's expression changed instantly. Panic flickered across his face, and he began to struggle harder. "You called the police?" He spat. Daniel didn't answer. Truth was, he hadn't, but it didn't matter who had. Maybe one of the neighbors had heard the gunshot. Maybe fate had decided they'd had enough suffering for one night. The sirens grew louder. The man tried to shove Daniel off him, but Daniel held firm until two police cars pulled up in a spray of gravel. Officers jumped out, guns drawn, shouting commands. Daniel raised his hands slowly and backed away. The man on the ground shouted something about ownership, about contracts and stolen wives, but his words fell flat against the sharp beam of police flashlights. Two officers pinned him to the ground, cuffing him while he cursed and kicked. "You don't understand!" he yelled. "She's mine! She's my property!" One of the officers, a woman with sharp eyes, looked from him to Alina, who was still clutching her baby on the porch, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" she asked gently. Alina shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, just scared." The officer nodded, then turned to Daniel. "And you, sir?" "I'm fine," Daniel said hoarsely. His jaw throbbed where he'd been hit, but he barely felt it. His eyes were on Alina, on the way she was holding her son, tight but careful, like she was afraid he might vanish if she loosened her grip. The man was still shouting as they dragged him to the car. "You can't take him from me. He's mine!" The officer didn't even look back. "Not tonight," she said flatly, slamming the car door. When the police cars drove away, their lights fading into the distance, silence returned to the farmhouse. The rain had stopped again, leaving behind a clean, cold scent that clung to the air. Daniel climbed the porch steps slowly, his body aching. Alina was sitting there, her son cradled against her shoulder. The baby had quieted now, making soft, sleepy sounds. She looked up at Daniel as he approached, her eyes red from crying. "He's really gone," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. Daniel nodded. "He won't hurt you anymore." For a moment neither of them spoke. The night was still, except for the soft coo of the child and the gentle creak of the porch. Then Alina looked at him, her voice trembling. "You could have died tonight. So could you," he said quietly. "But we didn't." Her gaze fell to the baby in her arms. "I don't know what happens now. I don't even know if I have the right to keep him. I don't have papers or proof, just this picture." Daniel sat beside her, his hand brushing against hers. "We'll figure it out," he said softly. "One step at a time." She looked at him, her lips trembling. "You don't have to help me. You've already done too much." "I want to," he said simply. "You and that boy, you don't owe me anything. But if you'll stay, maybe we can make this place feel like home again." Her eyes filled with tears, this time not of fear or pain, but something softer, something brighter. "I've never had a home," she whispered. "Not really," Daniel smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time you did." For the first time since he'd met her, Alina's smile reached her eyes. The baby stirred in her arms, opening his tiny hands as if grasping for something unseen. Daniel gently touched the child's head, his rough fingers trembling. The horizon began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something warm spreading in his chest, not the dull ache of loneliness, but the steady, glowing ember of hope. He looked at Alina, who was still holding her son close, her eyes half closed as exhaustion and peace settled over her. "You don't belong to anyone," he said softly. "But if you'll let me, maybe we can belong to each other." She exhaled, the faintest smile curving her lips, and leaned her head against his shoulder. As the sun broke over the hills, the three of them sat there in the golden light, silent but no longer alone. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, filled with the fragile, beautiful promise of something new.